Chapter 9. I wanted to go and look at the middle place about. Hey, is a good start, isn't it? I wanted to go and look at a place about the middle of the island that I'd found when I was exploring. So we started and soon got to it, because the island's only 3 miles long, a quarter mile wide. This place was tolerable long, steep hill, or ridge, about 40 foot high. We had a rough time getting to the top. The sides were so steep and the bushes so thick, we tramped and clumb all over it, and by we found a good big cavern in the rock, most up to the top side of it towards Illinois. The cavern was as big as 2 or 3 rooms bunched together, and Jim could stand up straight in it. It was cool in there. Jim was for putting our traps in there right away, and I said, but I didn't want to because climbing up and down there would be a pain all the time. But Jim said if we had the canoe hid in a good place and had all the traps in the cavern, we could rush up there if anybody was to come to the island, and they would never find us without dogs. And, besides, he said, them little birds had said it was going to rain. Did I want all the things to get wet? So we went back and got up the canoe and paddled up abreast the cavern and lugged all the traps up there. Then we hunted up a place close by to hide the canoe in, amongst the thick willows. We took off some fish off the lines and set them again, and had begun to get ready for supper. The door of the cavern was big enough to roll a hogshead in, and on one side of the door the floor stuck out a little bit and was flat and was a good place to build a fire on. So we built it there and cooked dinner. We spread the blankets inside for a carpet and eat our dinner in there. We put all the other things handy at the back of the cavern. Pretty soon it darkened up and began to thunder and lighten. So the birds was right about it. Directly it begun to rain, and it rained like all fury, too. I never seen the wind blow so. It was one of these regular summer storms. It would get so dark that it looked all blue-black outside and lovely, and the rain would thrash along so thick that the little trees a little way off looked dim and spiderwebby, and here would come a blast of wind that would bend the trees down and turn up the pale underside of the leaves, and then a perfect ripper of a gust would follow along and set the branches to tossing their arms if they was just wild. And next, when it was just about the bluest, blackest, it was bright as glory, and you'd have a little glimpse of the treetops a plunging away yonder off in the storm, hundreds of yards further than you could see before, dark as sin again in a second, and now you'd hear the thunder let go with an awful crash, and then go a rumbling, grumbling, tumbling down towards the sky to the other side of the world, like rolling empty barrels downstairs, where it's a long stairs, and they bounce a good deal, you know. Jim, this is nice, I says. I wouldn't want to be nowhere but here. Pass me along another hunk of fish and some hot cornbread. Well, you wouldn't have been here if it hadn't been for Jim. You'd have been down in the woods without any dinner and getting most drownded, too. That you would, honey. Chickens knows when it's going to rain, and so did the birds, child. The river went on a-raising for 10 or 12 days, till at last it was over the banks. The water was 3 or 4 feet deep on the island in the low places on the Illinois side at the bottoms, and on that side it was a good many miles wide, but on the Missouri side it was the same old distance across, a half a mile, because the Missouri shore was just a wall of high bluffs. Daytimes we paddled all over the island in the canoe. It was mighty cool and shady in the deep woods, even if the sun was blazing outside. We went winding in and out amongst the trees, and sometimes the vines hung so thick we had to back away and go the other ways. Well, on every old broken-down tree you could see rabbits and snakes and such things, and when the island had been overflowed a day or two, they got so tame, on account of being hungry, that you could paddle right up and put your hand on them if you wanted to. Well, but not the snakes and turtles. They would slide off into the water. The ridge our cavern was on was full of them. We could have had pets enough if we'd have wanted them. One night we catched a little section of a lumber raft, nice pine planks. It was 12 foot wide and about 15 or 16 foot long, and the top stood above the water 6 or 7 inches, a solid, level floor. We could see saw logs go by in the daylight sometimes, but we let them go. We didn't want ourselves showing in the daylight. Another night, when we was up at the head of the island, just before daylight, here comes a frame house down on the west side. She was a 2-story, tilted over considerable. We paddled out and got aboard, clumb in at the top stairs window, you see. But it was too dark to see yet, so we made our canoe fast and set in her to wait for daylight. The light begun to come before we got to the foot of the island, and then we looked in the window. We could make out a bed and a table, 2 old chairs, and lots of things around about on the floor, and there was clothes hanging in the wall. And there was something laying on the floor in the far corner that looked like a man. So Jim says, "Hello, you!" But it didn't budge. So I hollered again, and Jim says, "That man ain't asleep. He's dead. You hold still, I'll go see." He went and bent down and looks, and he says, "It's a dead man, yes indeedy. Naked, too. He's been shot in the back. I reckon he been dead 2-3 days. Come in, Huck, but don't you look at his face. It's too ghastly." I didn't look at him at all. Jim had thrown some old rags over him, but he needn't have done it. I didn't want to see him. There was heaps of old greasy cards scattered around the floor, and old whiskey bottles, and a couple of masks made out of black cloth. And all over the walls was ignorant this kind of words and pictures made with charcoal. There was 2 old dirty calico dresses, and a sunbonnet, and some women's underclothes hanging against the wall, and some men's underclothes too. We put the lot into the canoe. It might come in good. There was an old boy's old straw speckled hat on the floor. I took that too. There was a bottle that had had milk in it, and had a rag stopper for a baby to suck. We'd have took the bottle, but it was broke. There was a seedy old chest and an old hair trunk with the hinges broke. They stood open, but there weren't nothing left in them that was any account. The way things was scattered about, we reckoned the people had left in a hurry and weren't fixed to carry off most of their stuff. We got an old tin lantern, a butcher knife without any handle, a brand new Barlow knife worth 2 bits in any store, a lot of tallow candles, a tin candlestick, a gourd, a tin cup, a ratty old bedquilt off the bed, and a reticule of needles and pins and beeswax and buttons and thread and all such truck in it, and a hatchet and some nails and a fish line as thick as my little finger and some monstrous hook on it, and a roll of buckskin, and a leather dog collar and a horseshoe, and some vials of medicines that didn't have any label on them. And just as we was leaving, I found a tolerable good curry comb, and Jim he found a ratty old fiddle bowl and a wooden leg. Straps was broke off it, but bar that, it was a good enough leg, though it was too long for me and not long enough for Jim, and we couldn't find the other one, though we hunted all around. So, take it all around, we made a good haul. When we was ready to shove off, we was a 1/4 mile below the island, and it was pretty broad day, so I made Jim lay down the canoe and cover up it with the quilt, because if he had set up, people could tell he was a nigger from a good ways off. Paddled over to the Illinois shore and drifted down most 1/2 mile doing it. I crept up the dead water under the bank and had no accidents and didn't see nobody. We got home all safe.